Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. It's a great pleasure to be back once again for the monthly seminar series at Ebrahim College. CIRE, as I'm sure many of you know, is a research centre based at Ebrahim College dedicated to research informing Islamic thought, disciplines and education. And part of our work is to have a monthly research seminar to invite established and emerging academics in various fields to share their research, share their findings with the faculty, with students at Ebrahim College and with guests. And this month, alhamdulillah, we have Dr. Asim Islam, who's based at Cambridge Muslim College. And he's going to be talking to us on the subject of quantum theory and the mind. The quantum fields control the brain. Dr. Islam is a qualified medical doctor. His first degree was in medicine from the University of Cambridge. He went on to study a PhD in pure mathematics from Royal Holloway, and he's published in mathematics journals. And he's done further studies in physics from Imperial, and he's currently continuing to work in research and study at Imperial while working on his own research at the Cambridge Muslim College. So he's a real expert in his field, and he knows what he's talking about, and so we're going to benefit from his knowledge. And I've asked him kindly to make his findings accessible to an audience that doesn't have a specialist background in science.
What I'm trying to highlight today is going to be how there's a relationship between quantum theory and the mind, and the reason for this is because it actually relates to us as human beings. And I hope to show that really that we're not a purposeless, pointless blob of physiological flesh that we've somehow emerged on this planet randomly. Now it sounds like a big task, and also I want to highlight some of the most important results at the foundations of physics, which are extremely exciting in the sense that they lead to possibilities that have a very strong crossover to theology. Yet I'm aware that most people don't have the technical knowledge to understand the background of the physics and the mathematics to make any sense of this. So what I'll do is give you like a very brief outline, but hopefully you'll capture some of the flavour of this, and maybe look into it yourself further as well. So I'll start with a very, very simple question, which is what is science? I mean, it's a very, very reasonable question, because we all think of science as a very, everybody understands, but in fact, it's a very specific object. It's not just a collection of facts. It's not even a collection of absolute truths. This is important. What it is a systematic way of gathering knowledge that you can then therefore test and then make predictions from. And this is what really science is about. But the important thing is that knowledge is changing. It's not a fixed object. It's evolving. Science is evolving more than Darwinism would. People who are advocates of Darwin would say humans evolve. Science is evolving continuously and changing and adapting. Unfortunately, I won't have time to go into the technical details behind some of that, but it's a very important thing to point out. So what is religion? I mean, the first question I'm usually asked in these sort of talks is, why are you talking about science and religion? Well, the reason is that, of course, religion is not science, and science is not religion. So let me make that absolutely clear from the beginning. What religion is actually is a set of beliefs, and that doesn't require experimental verification. And maybe those beliefs could be about the cause, nature, and purposes of the universe. However, the essence of most religions is the belief in a superhuman agency, which we refer to as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or God, or whatever you refer to it as. So there's quite a different thing, but here is a very important crossover between science and religion, because those beliefs are something that can sometimes be tested scientifically. So I'm going to give you a quick thought puzzle. Not really that I'm really too interested in thought puzzle, but it's relating to what I'm going to talk about. And it's if I was to ask you to imagine that you could actually detach your brain from your head and put it in a room, and still stay alive and go about your daily business? The question I'm going to ask you, and it's important only in the sense that it relates to some of the physics that comes later. I'll ask you a question of where are you, and does it really matter where you are? So, just something to think about. Here we have a little cartoon which hopefully stimulate you to think again. Here's supposedly a comical cartoon about these cavemen who are doing quite sophisticated looking mathematics. But they say that we just don't have the technology to carry it out. And there's another chap up there who's actually inventing new ideas. But the thing is, this is exactly where we are today. So if you have the illusion that somehow science is any different today than this cartoon presents, then you got it wrong. This is the truth about what science is. It's continuously changing. We've achieved and stumbled across technological barriers to progress. We don't have the answers to all the questions, and we're still looking and struggling. Again, no time to discuss specific examples. And the other thing is a big illusion about what science really is. Well, science is a bunch of ideas. So we really technically should be classifying science as theories, hypotheses, and conjectures. But scientists and the media will often refer to everything as a theory. But the term theory is a very specific term. It actually means you actually tested it. The majority of scientists believe it, and there's good reason in terms of bodies of evidence that whatever you're proposing is true. That's a theory. On the other hand, a hypothesis is where you have good compelling reasons for something with some circumstantial evidence perhaps, but no final answer. And conjecture is where you have a very good guess at something, but it's as good as any guess, and maybe a clever guess, but maybe not the correct answer. That's really how science should be classified. So we commonly hear of things like, I've given only physics examples here, but there are examples from every aspect of science. Like field theory, general relativity, particle physics, quantum theory. These things are the mainstream theories because they're mostly accepted and understood to be experimentally verified. But there are many things that are hypotheses in the sense of the technical use of the word hypothesis, such as string theory, M theory, superstrings, all these things that people talk about as if they're a fait accompli and that somehow science has already sussed it. But these are just ideas, actually. And if you think multiverses, well, to this date, nobody knows about any you can't detect a multiverse. It's just a conjecture. So if anybody has this idea that somehow, and the idea of a multiverse is a very complex one because it's a very large collection of different objects. It's not just one type of multiverse. So these are ideas that I just want to blow some out of the water a bit to show that really we often loosely refer to science this way. So let's get on with some quantum theory. So we're going to go right back to school. A very basic picture here. So I'm going to look at this little picture of what you may have all learnt at school as a picture of an atom with a little blob in the middle with positive negative charges and this thing spinning around called an electron. This is the sort of typical school picture. But the point I'm trying to make is that when we refer to particles, from the physics point of view, it could be one part of this. It could be just like the one part of the nucleus. It could be an electron, or it could be the whole thing. But when I refer to something as a particle, I mean something that you can, just define as one object in a sense. So that's what I'm going to refer to as a particle. So this is now this is I'm going to move straight into the main heart of the problem, and this is basically going to illustrate to you where the whole of the conundrums that lie in the basic foundations of quantum theory come from this very simple, very basic looking experiment called the double-slit experiment. Now, because you're not, and all of you but one is not a physicist, this is not as dumbed down as it looks. Actually, a correct explanation without the maths. So here we see little boy who's kicking a football, and we see that this is supposed to be a wall, and there are two gaps in the wall, and there's another wall here. This is the wall looked at from the flattened out, so you can see where these balls eventually arrive when he kicks a football through these gaps. I think most of you would agree that if the gap was wide enough for the ball to get through, usually the balls will arrive some sort of in some sort of region amongst these two piles. That's what we call the traditional picture of a particle that we understand, and I think nobody would argue that that's how the particles behave. Just to give you an idea what happens with balls, with waves. Now here, these are for guys with fishing rods. They could be throwing a pebble in the water, and these two pebbles produce ripples. And where the difference is here, that you're throwing, if you continuously throw balls through, you only get two piles here. You get an interference pattern forming. To show you how this relates to the ball picture, this is just a diagram to show that when two ripples meet together with two peaks, they produce a bigger peak. If they produce a peak and trough, they cancel out. I'm sure you've seen this at school. So here we have a plain group of ripples moving towards two slits, exactly like the two gaps in the wall, and they then produce these sort of rippling patterns that go out, circles interfering, and where they come together to produce a peak, it's described by this, it's pictorially described by this bright light, and where they've cancelled out, it's like a dark band. Just to give you an idea of what waves do. And here it is from another perspective. So the question is, when we look at very small objects, what happens? Because obviously with very large objects, you're not going to argue if I try and drive a car through two gaps, it's going to arrive at one point or another. If I throw a ball or a golf ball or whatever it is, or fire a tennis ball through two gaps, it's going to do this sort of thing, isn't it? But something strange happens. Now this is the first thing, this is the beginning of the whole of quantum theory. Something strange happens now. What happens if we take something that's very, 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 very small, like an electron or particle, like that little picture I gave you, and you fire it through those gaps? What happens? We can do it one at a time, but what actually happens is that one at a time they arrive at positions as if they're being guided by a wave. So they no longer behave like a particle. In fact, they behave exactly like a wave. So, and this is the sort of picture that emerges instead of that. So this is why we had a problem describing physics, real physics, the way that Isaac Newton had described it, and Galileo and those classical physicists, because that type of physics doesn't really work, because there's no way you can write up a basic equation that does that. You have to introduce the idea of a wave. So here's another picture. It's not very clear, unfortunately, not projecting, but you see that one electron at a time is going through two slits, and gradually, as you kept firing one electron at a time, it produces this interference pattern just like a wave. So here's the big mystery. So, and surprisingly, a huge mystery. And really, I'd just like to point out this problem still remains a mystery to this date, and there is no theoretical physicist or scientist on Earth alive today, or who's passed away, that has solved this mystery. And this is the heart of the biggest problem in all of physics. People tend to avoid talking about it. It's called the measurement problem. So now what happens is that those are the little electrons going through the two slits, you see, they're producing this wave pattern. But if I try and measure which one they one at a time, which slit it actually went through with some sort of detector, the electron says, I'm going to behave like a ball again, and the whole thing collapses. So as soon as you're aware of it, the measurement, and detect which slit it goes through, the entire thing collapses down to two bands, just like a tennis ball again. The answer to that, this is an unresolved mystery, and the most vital thing is that we have to actually be making an observation of some sort. You have to be consciously aware of it, you have to observe it, you have to measure it somehow. That's why it's called the measurement problem. And so what we're doing is we're actually affecting the real world by our own observation. Now, there are going to be huge numbers of debates and arguments about this, but there's no question whatsoever that whatever an observation or a measurement means, we have to make one of those. And the majority of people would agree that measurements and observations do involve actually being aware, consciously aware of it. And that's the heart of it all. And this is where it's going to overlap with religion in a very, very large way, in a very, very big way. So the maths behind it, don't worry about this picture, it's just there for decoration in a way, but so here's the Schrodinger equation, one form of the Schrodinger equation. So you see what happens is instead of having the physics that we normally have, we have this funny thing here, psi. And psi is no longer a position of a particle, it's just a big probability thing. It's just something that carries information about probability. You've lost absolute position. You've lost all sense of precision. You don't know where anything is. So when you measure a particle in this room, for instance, you try to observe where it is. All you have, that psi, it just gives you this sort of information, regions where it's most likely to be. So until you actually measure it, you won't know, for instance, where a particle is in this room. It could be anywhere in these rooms, and that's the point. And that's all the information you can get from the quantum physics. One more thing you may have looked at is something called Schrodinger's cat. Before I mention that, is that if you can look at particles that have a property a bit like a gyroscope or a spinning top, which is called spin. So you spin up, spin down, very, very basic language. But you can try and also measure that. All dynamical properties of particles are unknown until they're observed and measured. This is the problem. And so the Schrodinger's cat problem rises from an analogy that's created by Schrodinger, where we now could send a particle through a detector to see whether it's up or down. And the question is now, if you put this cat inside a box that you can't, and you don't know the result of the measurement, except that if it's spin up, then the cat stays alive. But if it's spin down, it releases poison, the cat dies. But there's no way of detecting what's happened until you actually open the box to see whether the cat's dead or alive. And that means that in order to actually achieve the required outcome, you actually have to be consciously aware of it. You have to open the box to look. That's the point. The point is, you won't know the outcome until you actually observe it consciously. So this became such a big problem that now you have in the quantum theory, down at the particle level, we have this strange thing called a superposition, where you have things can be in more than one state at a time. The analogy here is a cat being both dead and alive, and there's Schrodinger and Heisenberg arguing. These are the two physicists that founded quantum theory about what's happened to the cat. So just to sum up that very briefly, you've got to remove this concept that there's any sense of absoluteness. Objects at a small level are in fact not precisely located. They don't have precise exact measurement positions and momentums and speeds. They have just a range of possibilities represented by like some superposition. And it's only when you measure something that you actually find out what the actual answer is. So you actually have to be consciously measuring it. So this was so objectionable that this outcome is just subject to probability, that Einstein famously, as you know, said, God does not play dice with the universe. This is a very famous statement. Everyone's heard it. That's what he's saying. He means that he does not. He objects to the fact that there's any probabilistic element to it. It should be fully deterministic. We should know precisely where everything is. Niels Bohr, who was actually an advocate of quantum theory and a developer, also said that anyone who's not shocked by it has not really understood it. So if you haven't understood it, there has to be a certain element of surprise, because it's not something you're expecting. So anyway, Einstein was so strongly opposed to it, he wrote a paper called the EPR paper, which is written with Podolsky and Rosen. And he attacked quantum theory, tried to find a failing in it, which subsequently proved to be wrong. Then in the 1960s, John Bell, an Irish physicist who had he lived longer, would definitely have won the Nobel Prize for a colossal result here. He produced an argument that shows, and this is extremely important, that Einstein was wrong, and that quantum theory, the fact that something is not precisely positioned or has no exact value until you consciously are aware of it, is actually true. So what we're saying is that it's not just a flaw in the theory, it's actually an objective reality. So what we're saying, in fact, is that reality itself is fuzzy. It needs something called consciousness or awareness. Now, I know the physicists will argue the different ways. I'll point that out briefly, but we're here to talk about how it intersects with religion. And I'm not going to go into technical details about entanglement. We don't have time. But the point is The idea that here's is a pictorial depiction of something that has spin up and spin down, and you see here that the reality before it's measured actually is a big fuzz, and you don't know if something is spin up or spin down. You don't know if it's up or down. It's somewhere. It's like this, like the cat being dead and alive, until you measure it. And the crucial thing is this. Now, this is the founder of quantum theory, Schrodinger. You haven't found a particle at K, he says. This is his Dublin seminars in 1995. You've produced one there. In other words, before its measurement, it's just a cloud of possibilities. Nothing's really actually defined. It hasn't got precise value, position, measure, velocity, momentum. It just has a whole bunch of possible outcomes. And so you have to actually go in there and physically observe it. And this is a conclusion that arises from Bell's theorem and the measurement problem, etc., that I've discussed. So, in other words, the particle in this room really isn't anywhere until you actually observe it. It's just very difficult for people to appreciate the magnitude of what's said here. And if those of you who've got slight mathematical slant, who like physics, this is a little graph of something like a wave function. Depicted like pictorially by this hill, and as soon as you measure something, the whole thing collapses to a spike, so it becomes a very precise position. And that abrupt change is what in mathematics you call a very discontinuous change. It's a sort of change that we just can't model, and we don't have a mechanism for describing it, and there isn't a solution that we have that's satisfactory. I'll point out one though that is highly favoured by physicists and philosophers too, which is called the many worlds. So you need to know about this many world solution, because physicists will tell you with confidence that the many worlds is the correct solution. It's actually just a conjecture, right? So just going back to the hypothesis, theory and conjecture, this is a conjecture. There's absolutely no evidence for it at all, yet it's embraced as if it's the truth, almost with religious conviction. And this is that. In other words, we avoid the idea of taking measurement. For instance, here's a cup of tea here, a cup of coffee. I can pick up coffee, or I can pick up tea. And what this conjecture says is that it's actually there is some mathematical, an elegant mathematics that goes with it, which is why they like it. The universe then branches into two universes. One where I'm actually drinking tea, one I'm drinking coffee. I'm doing both things. So, and then every single decision that we can make. The universe branches into two universes. So in fact there are infinite numbers of universes, and more disappointingly, infinitely many of us, even more disappointingly, we can't ever actually observe each other because they don't intersect. So this is a wild conjecture, but and there are fortunately good physicists like Steven Weinberg and so forth, who are Nobel Prize physicists, who say there's just too much metaphysical baggage to actually believe that is very much like believing quite a fanciful idea. So we're really that's the main, fully embraced idea due to Everett. That idea. So there are a few other points, other things, but there's people talk of physicists talk about something called decoherence, which is also not a solution, in fact. So here we go. We basically need to be aware, and this is where the human element comes in. So what about am I doing time? Yeah, so how about that then? So what is awareness? What is consciousness? The problem is we don't really understand ourselves. Now this is extremely important. What I'm going to say is extremely important. I'm saying this from a physics point of view, I'm saying this from a medical point of view, being a medical doctor as well, and I'm saying it from a physiological and neuroscientific point of view. I'm saying it from every aspect. We do not understand ourselves. We do not know why we are aware, and we don't understand what it actually means to be aware of anything. We don't understand. Any of you believe that it's down to the brain, you'll be surprised to learn it's not. And I'll explain that in a minute. The reason there's a very well-known philosopher of physics, David Chalmers, has broken the problem of consciousness down into the hard problem and the easy problem. The easy problem is about what's happening to the brain or inside the brain when someone's aware of something. That's easy. You can just measure it. But how does that then translate to something which becomes an experience? What's called a qualia. That's a very difficult problem. That's called the hard problem, and the answer to that is not known. Nobody knows at all. And it's still the biggest mystery. So we haven't got very far. We've got a big hole in the foundation of physics, but we also have a huge hole in ourselves, our understanding ourselves. We do not understand ourselves. And I'll make that very emphatically, that comment. Any scientist who claims to understand consciousness is not speaking the truth. We do not understand it. So we could look at various things, and this is where it gets very interesting, very exciting, because now if we try to delve a bit further to what really maybe is responsible for our awareness, we can look at physiological brains, we can look at computers, information, computability, neural network fields, lots of things. So let's look at a basic picture of the brain. Okay, those of you who study some biology, or pretty much everyone would have seen some sort of picture of the brain. You can see there's the frontal, parietal, occipital lobe. These are the sort of areas of the outer part of the human brain, the cortex, and this perhaps maybe this is where consciousness really is. So if you stimulate somebody by showing them a picture or flashing a light at them, this part of the brain called the visual cortex lights up. But does that mean that this is making us aware of it? And the answer is no. We don't. It's not where the awareness of these stimulus occurs. Or is it from the frontal lobe? A lot of activity occurs in the frontal lobe. Now, conscious activities often occur associated with activity in the front of the brain. But is that where consciousness actually is generated? And the answer is no, for very good reasons, long technical reasons, but I'll explain briefly. Here is the limbic system. We have emotional changes, experience differences in feeling. This is a part of the inner part of the brain, which is very active. So could it be here? And the answer is no again. In fact, you can actually sum it up by looking at all the papers, and you will find that there is no localizable region of the brain which is active in all types of conscious perception. So in other words, we call these correlates of consciousness, but there's no correlate of consciousness that's active at all times. In other words, we can't say that somewhere in the brain is where it makes us aware. So that doesn't help us too much, and to date it's a mystery. So what about going back and looking at other ideas? Now this is the idea I want to bring to your attention. This is a Libet experiment. Actually, this is the focus of the experiment was that in the I think 70s or 80s he looked at the readiness potential. In other words, when there was electrical activity in the brain when you're trying to be consciously aware of something, and Curiously found that half a second, 500 milliseconds before the awareness was there was electrical activity in the brain. This is a very famous experiment, and used to actually try and have a bash at free will, which actually turns out to be not true either. But he said something far more important for me and for us. He proposed that maybe then, if there's something that's stimulating the brain before aware of it, and yet is responsible for consciousness, maybe he proposed the idea of a conscious mental field. Is there something that's affecting the brain somehow, making us aware of it? So this is the first hint, something that's not sung. There's not much song and dance about this, but you can read a few things about it. It's interesting. But so a lot more time and effort has been focused on the brain as being maybe a computer. So is the brain a computer? Well, there are various proposed ideas. Now, those of you who've got some physics knowledge, who've looked into this at all, may have heard of Roger Penrose and Hameroff, Stuart Hameroff. Here they propose an idea where the brain actually responds to changes and fluctuations in the gravitational field and causes that so-called collapse thing to occur that I was talking to you about, because of the structure of these microtubules, which are like proteins throughout the brain. So this is one idea. A lot of arguments, very, very serious arguments about this. Someone called Max Tegmark did a paper to try and knock it down. There are technical reasons why it maybe doesn't work as a proposal, but these are all heavyweight physicists who are proposing ideas that should belong to the realm of biology and neuroscience. Matthew Fisher, another physicist in California, who proposed something called the Posner molecule, which is protected by lots of other atoms in this. In the centre of it, is the phosphate atom, and it has a particular useful property that if it's protected by all these other atoms in this big molecule, in the centre of that big cluster of things, balls. There's a thing called the nucleus of the phosphate atom spins and has a property that it could actually then connect to other phosphate atoms and produce computation, a very sophisticated quantum computation. And this idea is still being experimentally tested, and it may give us cues at how the brain might compute at a higher level. And maybe this is the answer, I don't know. So there is definitely quantum activity in the brain. We don't doubt that at all. There is activity in birds and animals. We know that involves quantum phenomena. But the question is, if it is the case that it's just down to computation, then why can't a computer then just become conscious? Do we actually need to be human at all? Why can't we just have an AI thing that becomes alive and does, replaces humans? Can a computer actually become conscious? And these are some important results I want to point out to you now. Something to take home and think about. Again, these are very big problems. So maybe if it is the case, then there should really be no technical problem. But unfortunately, here we are. Here's the first problem, called the Turing-Hawking problem. Turing, these are logicians and mathematicians. He showed that in fact there are problems that a computer cannot algorithmically solve, because essentially there's no solution algorithmically. It will just continuously churn away and churn away and churn away ad infinitum, and eventually end up like this, explode. In other words, it's just a comical picture here. Is basically not going to work, and that's called the Turing-Hawking problem. A computer doesn't know if it's going to come across a problem like that, whereas a human being tends to have more insight. It works in a different way. Now, here's a very important result. It's extremely important, and it's that the foundations of all of our thinking, all of science and all of mathematics, is the Gödel's incompleteness theorem. And there are, contrary to our belief, we think that everything is true or false from our logic, but actually it's not the case. There are things that are undecidable, and the reason for that in this sort of scientific study is that there are science is based upon an axiomatic structure. In other words, you build results from basic assumptions. So the axiomatic structure enables, it has a flaw in itself. You need to add more axioms, or by axioms I mean assumed results, assumed things that you don't want to prove, don't need to prove. And all of mathematics and science is based upon this. In fact, all of mathematics is based upon it. So you will always come across a problem that can neither be solved, or proved true or false. It's undecidable, and a computer simply cannot work that out at all, because in fact all computers are based upon a sort of axiomatic and algorithmic processing and so forth. We can't. So the computer has that problem, and so much so that Penrose, Roger Penrose, a physicist in Oxford, dedicated a lot of his life to studying consciousness and brain computation. He set this challenge that he is confident that no computer can actually solve, but it easily solved by human beings. So the computers don't have the insight to solve it because of the algorithm. There's no algorithmic processing that can see a solution to this problem. I'm not going to go into it because it will take a while. But what is Penrose saying after all this? Is it It's very important, because this is not a theological statement. He's saying that this is a scientific statement. There are things that the human mind achieves that even the most powerful supercomputer cannot, but we don't know why. And there is now evidence that the quantum effects are happening in biology. We know that photosynthesis and migration of birds and so forth. Why not something similar happening in the mind? This is comments from Roger Penrose. I'm going to jump straight into the more sophisticated, well, not more sophisticated, it's slightly more general phenomenon, the idea of field. Now, we all use electric fields, or you put a magnet to another magnet, you get the idea of a sense of a field, that something is having an effect on something without touching it. That's what I mean. Fields pervade all of space. The quantum phenomena that are actually can be described very beautifully by a more general theory. And actually the most general theory of all, is called quantum field theory. All of quantum theory I've been talking about, is just a sort of a zero-dimensional, version of quantum field theory. So that's basically a more general form. Now here it's important. Now, what happens if you look at the brain again? Let's go back to the brain and look at the electrical activity of the brain. What's happening in the brain is that something strange is happening, and this is extremely important, very, very important. A lot of experimental work from in the last 70 to 100 years. Here we see someone particularly called Lashley, who did a lot of work on memory and brain activity. Notice that when you look at the brain electrical activity, the whole brain lights up simultaneously in a snapshot, like a cinematographic frame. It's not just going tiddly tiddly tum tum tum, from sending a signal from one end to the other. It's not doing that. It's just not doing that. It's actually lighting up simultaneously in different patterns. And the sources of the patterns are they could describe it as neuropil, which is basically the surface of the brain. So what I can do is to give you some sort of visual analogy. Hopefully this might work. Yeah, there. So you see here, this is a mouse brain. You can see some activity here. The electrical activity is very fast and snaps. It's a good picture. It's a useful picture. That's just blood flow. You can ignore that. But if you look at the middle one, now this is smoothed in time. In other words, it's taken some of the detail out and smoothed it. And notice what's happening here is it's like almost like fog or condensation. Yeah. Now this led some brilliant physicists to model the idea of brain electrical activity in a different way using quantum fields. Right. So here is a summary of the problem. The problem is you try to tackle the problem now using classical physics, the electrical activity, wiring and the circuit. You find that the mechanisms we need don't work. Diffusion is too slow, currents are too weak, the length of the neurons in the cortex are too... There's no way of describing how the brain electrically snaps into large areas of activity all at once. And so we actually need to use quantum field theory to describe it, and this has been initially studied by a physicist in Japan called Umezawa, and is subsequently developed much further particularly by two people. One is Freeman, who's a neuroscientist, a very eminent neuroscientist, and Vitiello, who is a theoretical physicist. So the point is that what they found, and the last paper that Freeman published, shows that there's an evidence between a link between the electrical activity, the shapes that form, and mental perception. So the best clue we have is that when there's a sudden snapshot, we can relate it to a percept. But the important thing is that the perception is revealing remembrance of the stimulus, not the stimulus itself. If I give you a cheese sandwich in this room, or to give it to you outside, it's going to produce a different type of electrical activity and different pattern. So it's not stimulus driven directly, it's the remembrance of condition. And so therefore, the important point is that when you look at the activity and you relate it to percept, there's no way of disentangling whether the activities come from the brain, in other words matter, or from the mind, or in other words your own sense of your own self, your sense of cognition. You cannot disentangle. This is a result of nearly 100 years of study, and by very sophisticated mathematics and neuroscience. Vitiello and Freeman are the two people involved in this, but there are many other scientists involved. Just in case you think it's just physicists and that they're off on a tangent and standing on their own pedestal, you're wrong. This is actually a result that arises from neuroscience too. So if you look at the science behind it, for instance, Duisberg et al., you see the same problem. Discrete moments of perceptual experience are implemented by synchronized activity of large area of the brain at once, which you cannot associate with a basic classical nerve transmission. This is actually something that actually, funnily enough, Descartes had actually imagined in relation to memory, and the whole thing was developed into a much bigger theory. I'm not selling myself, but the point is there was a talk at the CMC conference on the 8th of September last year, which is on the website, which actually I've dealt just with this area. It is extremely interesting. But so, in other words, we're using quantum field phenomena, a much higher form of physics, to describe mental perception, and it involves the idea of fields, not any. And so, therefore, there's a much higher. Something strange is happening in the brain, and it's not straightforward. We're going relating it back to Libet's experiment. So, a couple of more things I want to mention is going to move quickly on to something called integrated information theory. Now, the other approach is to, and this is a very, very important approach, developed again in conjunction with neuroscientists and physicists, but particularly it's a remarkable neuroscientist called Tononi, who decided, well, maybe it's just information, maybe consciousness is just information, but what's different is that we can't separate that information into parts. In other words, if as I'm standing here, I can recall this, but if I then later on try to remove a part of that memory or that feeling, association, and just try to just recall the table in isolation, for instance, I can't do that. So the information, whatever I'm feeling, whatever I'm hearing, saying, and tasting and smelling, that's all part of it's integrated information. So there is a whole very sophisticated, beautiful theory behind this. It's mathematical, and it's summed up by something called this measure called phi, which has clinical applications. It's not random theory. It's been used in experiments on real brains. Now, I'm taking it a step further now. I'm going to come to the boundaries of some more interesting proposals, possibly conjectures now. Adam Barrett, who's a senior scientist in consciousness study, previously a string theorist, the Sackler Center for Consciousness Studies, has proposed that perhaps as the whole world around us, believe it or not, is just actually, which I haven't emphasized, is actually just made of fields. All fundamental particles actually are just oscillations and fields. Well, why can it not be that those fields somehow carry that integrated information that Tononi's proposed? Maybe there's some sort of panpsychism. Maybe we are in a world where we don't just have this individual sort of conscious awareness. Maybe it's something part of a bigger phenomenon that in the Far East it's been a great belief in panpsychism. So he suggested maybe this integrated information is an attribute, a fundamental attribute of real fields. This is extremely important because it relates to other ideas. Now, by Kremnitzer and Ranchin, he's from Imperial, by the way, and Kremnitzer's at Oxford. He came to the CMC as well and gave a presentation, as did the previous chap. Kremnitzer, he's proposed, along with Ranchin, that if there is that integrated information, he could produce a quantum form of that integrated information, and show that by using a similar model to physicists using something called those, for the benefit of the physicists in the audience, GRW, where you have this increasing volume, if you like, in weight of this integrated information in one area, somehow might cause a collapse of the wave function. In other words, perhaps the brain is in fact doing this. Perhaps it's just taking this integrated information and then producing and collapsing the wave function because there's a way of somehow concentrating this integrated information. It's just a proposal and an idea, but it's extremely important because it's the first time serious mathematicians and physicists are looking at these ideas. So I'm going to move on because we have less time, not so much time, so I'm going to move on to the relevance to theology, philosophy, and mostly theology. And I'm going to quote something from some physicists, just in case you thought all scientists were disbelievers. You'd be interested to know that more than half, certain world surveys have shown that more than half scientists are actually believers, but the media will have you believe that everyone in science is attacking religion, which is not the case. Dr. Hans-Peter Durr was a former head of the Max Planck Institute, and he said that he felt, these are his words, that beyond this is an infinite reality which is much bigger than this reality, and that this world is rooted in this. And he said that in this way our lives in this plane of existence are accompanied already by what he described as some sort of afterworld, and the body does die, but the spiritual quantum field, which he describes it in his words, continues. So therefore he is immortal. And similarly, Hans Halverson, who's still around, who I've contacted and emailed before, has written a very excellent paper called The Soul Hypothesis. And in this, he's a philosopher of physics in Princeton University, that human beings are actually more than just their bodies, but also living souls. And he then posits that there's no conflict between quantum theory and the idea of the soul. Now, why am I talking about the soul all of a sudden? Well, the reason is because this is how theology brings about the idea of self or awareness, and now moving into the Quran shortly, inshallah. Here you have the origins of the idea of a soul came well before all this from Aristotle in a famous writing called De Anima, where parts of the soul, the intellect, can exist without the body. This is an important point, going back to that original thought experiment. Now, Farabi, as obviously many of you will know anyway, an Islamic scholar and a philosopher, he said that the soul is defined by that is a thing that gives the inanimate objects life. But he said something else. This is very interesting. This is the belief of many of the earliest this era of Islamic scholars, that the idea of there's something called an active intellect. In other words, there's an already pre-existing prevailing sort of sense of intellect from which the individual develops its own intellect. Now, relate that back to the idea of the panpsychism and the idea of the fundamental fields carrying, integrated information. It's very, very similar, smacks of the same sort of feel, and therefore this was his belief. And Farabi described 4 aspects of soul: appetite, sensitivity, imagination, and rationality. But he said that the rational soul, which we refer to, you see a lot, we refer to in Islam a lot, the idea of rationality and thinking, using. He described that as the faculty of reasoning and will that reigns above the rest of it. This is Farabi's way of thinking of things. And then Avicenna, he had wrote an encyclopedic work called Ash-Shifa, and the healing, and in this he posited an independent, self-conscious, substantial and immortal soul. And the crucial thing is the essential separation between body and soul and matter. And so these are some of the Islamic philosophical views on it. So you can see that somehow you have the current physical models that we have very, very roughly summed up in the diagram. You see that there are physical models of the universe. There are fields that seem to have a direct impact on the cognition and memory, and then connected to the body and the senses. In the same way as the active intellect and the soul and the body and the senses, there's a very strong parallel between the two ideas. So here's an artistic depiction of fields. I'm going back to the quantum fields again, and there's a little diagram of fluctuations of quantum vacuum and quantum activity, just to show you some of the ideas we've mentioned. So I'm going to move into the Quran then, briefly. So I'm just going to point out, we don't have time to go into any great detail, but like, for instance, take Surah Mulk, say, قُلْ هُوَ الَّذِي أَنْشَأَكُمْ وَجَعَلَكُمْ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبْصَارَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ قَلِيلًا مَا تَشْكُرُونَ. The crucial thing is al-af'idah. Now, this is what, if you like, the faculty of feeling, understanding, thought, consciousness and awareness. Now, in the Quranic perspective, of course, I spoke to a professor of Arabic in Istanbul last year, and I asked him what does he really mean by, what does he understand as the af'idah? And he said it is the center of the heart, all intelligence and thinking, the center of qalb, supports the brain and the biological part. In a sense, if a person, if afida was a person, then the brain is just the computer which the person operating. It's a higher aspect of self. So you see, in a sense, it defines self, what is really I. So there's quite a strong parallel between this and what we've been saying through physics. So I'm just going to conclude then briefly by a statement. It just really encapsulates a lot of what I've said from a physicist who's not writing from a religious perspective, but as actually making very important observations about the world in his book called The Mind of God by Paul Davis. And this is a very important statement, because he set up a centre for astrobiology. It looks at a lot of biology and physics combined, but he's also a very good theoretical physicist, well known. So he said, and the point I'm going to make is that it's crucially showing how we're not a purposeless thing, and this is what he says. So what does it mean? What is man that we may be party to such a privilege of being aware? I cannot believe that our existence in this universe is a mere quirk of fate, or an accident of history, or an incidental blip in the great cosmic drama. Our involvement is too intimate. The physical species, Homo, may count for nothing, but the existence of mind in some organism on some planet in the universe is surely a fact of fundamental significance. Through conscious beings, the universe has generated self-awareness. This can be no trivial detail, no minor byproduct of mindless, purposeless forces. We are truly meant to be here. And that's a very powerful statement coming from theoretical physics. So I'm just going to leave it at that then, if that's okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Asim, for that enlightening presentation. Now, it was a lot to take in, so really I'd like to stress, please, if there were certain parts or aspects that you were really interested in but it moved too fast, or you didn't quite get it, or you want to ask more about it or follow-up questions, or if you've got more advanced questions from your own reading, please do raise them and we can have a discussion as well. So anyone got any points they'd like to bring up or questions to ask? Yes, Farhan.
Okay. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you very much for your lecture. I'm an avid reader, but an amateur when it comes to physics and science.
Okay.
But since we're talking about the soul and consciousness, something that we had looked into with Sheikh Murad, I thought I'd bring that up, which is singularity.
Okay.
What are your views on singularity?
Well, singularity, you've got to remember, is actually a sort of a mathematical quirk in a way. First of all, singularity is a general term, and it doesn't specifically, we're referring to a particular type of singularity. But so it's actually where the physics sort of breaks down, if you like. That's what we refer to as a singularity. But in relation to that, what's the question in relation to? What's your question precisely?
If there are those who believe that, as I understand it, very basic, from a basic perspective, that the consciousness somehow is a tangible thing that can be preserved, say outside the body or the mind or whatever we understand to be abstraction. And surely it must be, the only way to do it would be to quantify it and measure it. But as I understand it, looking into quantum physics, it's not something that is measurable.
Well, that's right. That's not, what I've given you is quite a huge amount of information in very potted summary. So, yes, you're right in relation to what's called the measurement problem and the structural quantum theory. But where you're not right is when you look at the actual what we believe to be the structural conscious thinking or consciousness or cognition, it's more and more believed to be a property that is physical, that is measurable. That's what the phi was, going back to the measurement of the quantum integrated information, which if you were to have a look at that single there. But Tononi is the main chap. The idea is that information in that form is a fundamental aspect of consciousness, and it's not something that is that's just lost. If the body dies, that information is just not going to disappear. It's just there. So, and in terms of the singularities, that's a completely different question. I mean, I'm not sure how that directly relates to this, but in terms of the fact that your point about whether or not it's actually going to be preserved, or whether it's even defined. Yes, it is defined, and the type of physics and mathematics involved is actually quite different, but it's not in conflict with quantum theory, and it's not subject to the sort of information I mentioned to you. That's why physicists here, you see, we're talking about quantifying it and measuring it, and biologists use it. So it is a well-defined thing. Yeah. But have a look at Tononi to the work. Yeah, that's the way to look. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm just trying to get my head around. So if in the beginning particles are very present,
yeah,
then once we sort of observe them, then we can define them and measure them.
Yeah.
Is there a possibility to have multiple conclusions then?
Yes, that's right. The point probability, it's the other way around. There are multiple possibilities before you measure them. That's the structure of quantum theory, and that's just the reality of life. We don't understand why that's the case, but there are whole possible outcomes, and the point is you don't know what's going to happen until you measure it. And so there, in a sense, you're not really controlling the outcome, but you have to be aware consciously in order for the outcome to occur. But which one happens, we don't know. Yeah.
And is that influenced by our outer experience? Is the outcome influenced by our experience?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. Yeah. Sorry, another question?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
So it's quite clear that in the philosophy of science and philosophy of physics, in methodological naturalism, which is a commitment that we should primarily explain nature through natural causes. But to what extent do you feel that quantum mechanics, consciousness, issues about other issues in science are loosening the commitment to methodological naturalism? To what extent do we have to have something maybe beyond cause and effect, maybe more metaphysical naturalism? So you alluded to the act of intellect.
Yeah.
The metaphysical theory at the end of the day without naturalistic causes, and also make a comparison. So what do you feel in terms of the commitments that we have currently now, philosophy of science, philosophy of physics, that we have to have cause and effect to explain these things?
No, I think that what you're referring to, implicitly or indirectly referring to, is the whole foundation and the approach to physics, science and metaphysics, if you like, broadly. And the thing is, the point is that science is only capturing a small aspect of reality. So something I simply cannot emphasize in a short period of time, but we only have a picture of a very small part of what we describe as reality. So you cannot describe everything through science, and at this point in time, we don't have all the answers. Even the theories aren't complete. For instance, the standard model of particle physics is thought to be the most complete theory ever. Is now got a hole in it, and looking at neutrino masses and trying to see what to do, because the theory can't be extended as it is, and so forth. And there are endless numbers of areas. Like, for instance, we've all heard of dark matter. We still don't know what it really is, and a lot of study going. And these are just like tips of an iceberg of failings. So you cannot say, we're not talking about, and this is why I said, going back to the beginning, science is an evolving and changing object. It's not an absolute rock. It's more like a plasticine, and it's changing and moulding. So we're not going to get a complete answer entirely, I don't think, through science anyway. But it's a very good help, because it actually the rational thinking has led us to the point where we are now, actually finding that we're almost checkmated. So where scientists were trying to throw humans out the window and make them irrelevant, we now see that actually humans keep coming back to the centre and are very important. Yeah.
I don't know if I know your specialty background is kind of more mathematics related material, but I've come kind of more on the theological side.
Yeah.
And my question would be, when we speak about the measurements, that kind of goes a bit beyond my level, that's practically done. But when we talk about collective consciousness and the self in the I, and how that relates to our ability to actually delve into our own creation or existence, and how that then can reciprocate back into our existence and into the self, do you take any position on those ideologies, or where that direction is going, kind of away from the actual scientific?
Are you referring to a collective consciousness?
Yeah, the idea is that
collective as in we're collectively connected. Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
Negative and positive energy.
Yeah. No. 100%. No, I mean the point is that this. You see, once again, each science is a very difficult area because you end up going down one little road sometimes and come to a dead end. And really, there's the problem with a lot of this science is that you actually need to have so much scientific knowledge to understand what it means, and then you have to interpret it in a wider setting. So, yeah, what you're referring to is actually has got some basis to it, and there are studies, collective consciousness. We don't really know what the reality of us is, and whether we are part of we could influence each other collectively. Certainly, going back to that. One of the slides I didn't go into, entanglement is a really great phenomenon that shows there's something far more mysterious going on in the real world. How one person can, one thing can be observed at one point, and precise exact opposite instantaneously somewhere else, even almost infinitely far away at the other end of the galaxy. And there's definitely, and that act involves actually measuring. Or don't think measuring too seriously, because physicists themselves don't even define it very well. But you know what I mean. You're going to take a measurement, dip something. So therefore, there is something far greater going on in terms of what you're saying. Yes, there is definitely scope to go much further, and I think the theological and philosophical approaches need to be there stronger than ever. And this is just a small aspect of the whole picture. And we can only achieve what science does, which is basically try and find a measurement, observe something, try and take a guess at it. But it's not going to give you the full picture. So yes, once again, I think what you said there, is that answering your question, or is there something else that you wanted to ask?
Do you know of any active studies that are currently being done to kind of measure those?
I don't know the precise. I can't quote them to you, but I do know of them. I have come across people who. Because mostly these sort of studies are not necessarily by physicists. Often they're by psychologists or sometimes biologists and things like that. But yeah, there are studies about collective consciousness and so forth. The psychology.
Where they're combining that information, where they're meeting, because I feel like we have all these specialists in different areas, but they're not congregating.
Yes, that's right. The problem is the trouble is that scientists who are hardcore tend to not to take the other type of softer scientists so well. So there is a lot of conflict between scientists themselves, and that's the problem. But yeah, absolutely, 100%. So in other words, you cannot rule any of that out at all. This is just a small part of the picture.
Right.
Yeah.
So what you're presenting is mostly a kind of perspective from the cognitive interpretation.
Sorry, from the.
Cognitive interpretation.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I just wanted to pick your brain about other interpretations of concept.
Yeah.
You're able to multiverse interpretation, but there's also pilot wave theory.
Yes. Yeah. And what was this?
Retrocausality.
Okay, yeah.
Have you looked at them?
Yeah, of course, and this wasn't really the setting for that. That's why I haven't touched upon them. But we can talk later. I mean, but in a nutshell, yes, absolutely. Pilot wave theory is okay. It works, but there are objections as to whether the nature of the pilot wave is a real pilot wave, and I think a lot of people use things like decoherence, but we know for technical reasons. Mixtures of states and so forth. It's absolutely not a solution to measurement problem. And yeah, I've looked at all of them. Yeah, GRW, all of them. That's what I do. I work with Jeremy Butterfield at Trinity College, Cambridge. He's a specialist in this area. So we spent a long time and talking and studying. And I mean, what I'm presenting to you is I've tried to keep those arguments out of the way because they could take up more than 45 minutes of a lecture. But yes, absolutely, the answer to your question is none of the other solutions you could hold firm to your heart and say they're really true. No, and in fact, this is why so many theoretical physicists who are hardcore physicists are spending their time doing this consciously. And everyone I'm speaking about is hardcore theoretical physicists. They're not out on the fringe. They're specialists in proper.
Would you consider the wave function as kind of a physical ontological property rather than an abstract practical mathematical?
This is a great question. Yeah, I think that's a very difficult question to answer. I don't really have an answer to that one. It's more of a tool, I think, a mechanism, really, whether it's physical or not. But it's certainly, like with all these things, you can't even, if you ask, I've spoken to, for instance, Tim Evans at Imperial College, who's a quantum physicist, he said, really, what is it? What is a quantum field even, for instance? It's just a collection of these operators. But what's an operator? So really what we're doing is just a bunch of operators in the field. But what we're really doing is actually just we're producing a model that works as a picture of it. We can't even pin down full reality of it. So I don't think we can answer those with clarity, really. Yeah.
We'll go first to the end.
Yeah. 100%. Oh yeah. Yeah. The Quran is a revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and is revealed at a time where people can understand a certain type of language and technology. So the idea of waves and brain waves, I don't think you can directly infer from it that I can come across. But everything about the self and our own will and actions and so forth, that's there. So the technical side of brain waves, I don't think I can really say honestly I've seen in the Quran directly. But that's not to say that that's the whole picture. This is our approach to understanding it. So,
just on the Quran, because it's kind of why I feel a bit more. You've got the term, you've got the nafs, anfus, right? So this is could be interpreted as self again or soul, right? You also have the terminology of ruh, which again could be spirit or soul. So you have these terminologies in the Quran. Now, it's obviously very challenging to try to take a Quranic term, which is referring to a metaphysical and a sort of unseen reality, and then try to say, here we found it and we can measure it, right? That's a difficult thing to do, but certainly the concept of there being a non-physical, observable way, a non kind of apparent aspect of a human being that isn't just the brain, that isn't just signals in the brain, but is something that is sort of transcends that, and that goes into the human being when they're born and leaves after the death. This is obviously absolutely affirmed in the Quran. So insofar as we're getting indications of that, I think it's only confirming what we know from the Quran.
Yeah.
But obviously we don't just jump in there and say, we're gonna necessarily put them one to one. But I think certainly it's a fruitful area of research and thinking, and Muslim scholars have always tried to use the science of the scholars of tafsir, the scholars of the theologians. They would use the science of their time and bring that into conversation with the scripture and try to see, what can we understand? And I think that's a duty upon human beings, especially in a time where people want to use that science to say, don't believe there's something more. If you've got results saying, actually this is affirming the worldview, I think we should make the most of it.
Could I just write off one more point on that? Absolutely correct. So the whole point of this science, as I'm trying to emphasize, is that basically it shows that what we think of ourselves, what we describe as ourselves, is not necessarily part of our physical self. And that's the point about it. And it can be something quite abstract, and it's more in keeping with our Islamic understanding of self.
Can we go to the sister in the middle?
Okay, well,
I was wondering if there's been any theoretizing about differences in the consciousness of animals and humans with regard to these.
Very good question. I mean, we know that the consciousness and measured through cognition and activity of the brain and so forth is there in animals to certain levels, and you could say that how much you could say about whether they are actually aware of consciousness is difficult, but going back to the integrated information again, and I'm trying to sell us there because I'm not saying that it's the answer yet anyway, but the point about integrated information is that you can actually take the whole concept right back down to even more basic levels, and they're trying to say, well, just can a group of particles be conscious, or can an amoeba be conscious? And you can measure the level of integration and see how far it goes. So you can actually somehow quantify it. But yeah, definitely, without question, there's physiologically the brain activity, and for instance in mammals, is quite similar, and there's no reason why there shouldn't be good levels of consciousness. I mean, we know that from the Quran that you're the specialist in this. There are we heard the hoopy and the birds and so forth, and speaking to Solomon and so forth. We know that animals do have an ability to communicate as well between each other. And even without going to the Quran, we know that they have methods of communicating. So they must be aware of something, I think. Yeah.
Mazuka?
You might have already touched upon this.
Can you speak up? Sorry.
So, I just want to know in terms of the relationship between determinism and free will.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? And do you say that because there are
Yeah, you have a very, very good question. This is an entire lecture, right? It's a brilliant question, and really one of the things that really deserves its own time. Basically, from a bit like Bell's theorem, which I mentioned to you, that blew Einstein's ideas out of the water. We have two brilliant mathematicians and physicists. One is actually a pure mathematician called Conway, and the other one is Conway, C-O-N-W-A-Y, and Cochin, who is one of the again brilliant physicists who put their heads together in the last decade or so. They produced a series of theorems which are based on the same physics, which shows without any question between the structure of space-time and the way the world is, using the ideas from quantum theory, that free will is real. It's not. In determinism, in other words, your question about determinism, whether or not free will has an effect, is that yes, the answer is free will is a real phenomenon, and they produce a series of results. The final one is, well, the most recent one was the Conway-Cochin strong free will theorem. It's a very important result, and it's a scientific sledgehammer. It shows that we definitely have free will.
Actually, yeah, I'll voice and then I'll try to ask you.
My question is
Yeah.
more about the field and kind of the interaction between theoretical physics and
And sorry.
between theoretical physics and theology, or
Oh, right.
kind of material science. And
Yeah.
physics.
Yeah.
What in your experience, kind of
Yeah.
exploring kind of quantum physics and consciousness?
Yeah.
What would you say is the best approach to exploring kind of the interface and the interplay between these disciplines? Because there are a lot of other areas where the interplay comes in.
Yeah. Are you referring to its theological implication? Is that what you mean?
Kind of the theological implications related to physical.
Yeah.
Results.
I mean, everything I've said, just I've touched upon various topics, but probably the most significant area, probably, which is yet very unexplored. I mean, I've mentioned lots of them. Is the idea, for me personally, between quantum fields and how they affect directly on matter, because that's where Vitiello and Freeman have done their work. And interestingly enough, because you're a theoretical physicist anyway, you use the idea of symmetry breaking in many body physics, symmetry breaking, and the idea is that they use a field that actually natural, intrinsic to the brain, which is the electric dipole of water molecules, and the idea is that they then show that symmetry breaking results in the long range correlation. But the point is implies the existence of a field, so that the field is actually directly related to the cognition, shows that actually our mind is actually possibly affecting matter and vice versa. But interestingly, the important thing about this model is because of the structure of quantum field theory, you need to double the degrees of freedom. So I'm sorry, I'm answering the question directly to physicists. So what happens is that you have this extra mode, which is outside the physical self, and that mode is essentially immaterial, but actually you could just as well be us. So effectively, there's dual mode. So that's what I find most interesting. Has a very powerful theological implication, as does all of this really. But that's what I feel is the strongest area of interest.
I'm going to ask a question.
Yeah.
So, when you mentioned about the kind of fog-like, pictures
Yeah.
to look at the brain, right? And you're saying that as I understood what you're saying, that the classical physics of neuronal transmission wouldn't work.
Correct.
It's too instantaneous, right? And obviously the fog is kind of suggestive of these kind of wave functions or whatever.
Absolutely.
Now, okay, so are we, or possibly saying that these quantum wave functions in the brain, are we saying that is a physical correlate to something else that is consciousness, or are we trying to say that those wave functions sort of are consciousness in the brain? Because I thought one of the things you were doing with the lecture was saying we have to get out of this biological reading of the brain as a kind of computer that's generating consciousness, but at the same time you have these things we're picking up that do seem to be kind of quantum in form. So are we talking about a kind of Cartesian dualism where there's kind of a... can you just elaborate on that point?
Well, actually...
And also one more thing to add in.
Yeah.
Is that different from the experiment that saw the activity before the consciousness? Or is this instantaneous with the consciousness?
I think the last question I'm going to put to one side because that's really a different thing altogether. But I've actually sort of indirectly answered the question you've just asked with more technical language. But so basically all I've said is that the electrical waves, this is very important, that we see in the brain, they're just an imprint, like a hint that something's going on. So, like a footprint. Okay. So what we're seeing is that your mention of whether it's the brain doing it or not, and the answer is no. And the point about Cartesian dualism, which I'm referring to as the tilde mode, is the immaterial mathematical mode that actually could just as well be self. So in other words, there is another dual, if you like. Right. In fact, Vitiello went so far, he wrote a book, My Double. That's what he actually referred to. That's his more basic version of the same theory, and he refers to that essentially like a Cartesian dual. So effectively, what's happening is that their paper, which I referred to, this one here, is essentially saying that we cannot distinguish, we can't separate whether the effect of what he's describing as mind is actually referring to something that's not physical. Something that's not physical. And that non-physical thing is showing its clues through the electrical patterns. That non-physical thing can be described to an extent because there's a mathematical reason for it, but we don't know what it really is. So there is a dual,
Right. Yeah. That's very fascinating. And I'm going to do one follow-up question as well. My second question is, you get to this, if that is the case, right, then we're back to a fundamental category of analysis being what we know of as consciousness. The thing that does the measuring, the thing that can check, the experience we have, and you can't just reduce that. If that is the case, then does that bring a kind of like phenomenological analysis back on the table as absolutely valid for trying to probe into our reality, i.e., like if qualia becomes the important thing now, how we experience something, this is something we can't necessarily really measure because it's subjective to an extent. So it puts a kind of, you can use the word existential or phenomenological, you can get into this mode of first-person analysis, and does that come back on the table sort of philosophically or theologically as a mode of engagement, as well as these kind of sort of third-person scientific modes?
Yeah, and what just got to remember that we're back again to the scientific method and approach. We're not really what we're finding is essentially clues, little hints, and that's all that science is doing. So I don't think that it's going to become all measurable and physical. It's I think at the moment it's just quite satisfying to see that whatever hints and whiffs we have picked up of confirming what we already believe. Essentially, that in a nutshell. I think this impression that somehow science is the answer to all things, that's the impression we've got to destroy. That's probably all I can say about that. Sorry, I don't use my chair.
We'll go back to the side.
I just want to ask, going back to the types of measurements that have been done on various waves and this understanding going in and out of the brain. If that energy is coming from an external into an internal state, or is it predominantly internal going to an external? Is there an equal exchange? And secondary to that, is there any measurements on the positive and negative energies that are being used as wave measurements?
Yeah, okay, that's really good question. That's the point. What you're suggesting, you could at the moment, it's just a conjecture. We don't know, and the point is that some of the ideas here I mentioned are from external coming to internal. So, in other words, what we're saying is not effectively the brain itself doing the work. That's essentially what we're saying, not directly. So that's the root of it. Sorry, behind me. So that's the root of the whole the argument. But basically, the whole of all of these phenomena are suggesting that there could be a wider external reason for what we feel internally, and maybe even our self is something external rather than internal. In other words, we are just a machine. We're a ghost we're operating this machine called ourselves, our body. And positive and negative, I can't really answer that one directly because I don't understand exactly what you mean, but I hope that's help anyway.
And like energy fields, obviously you spoke a bit about, I mean, this is the physicist side, where you're looking at the energy fields that are being measured, whether that's in the brain or external of the body. But are there any ways to measure whether they are positive, negative waves that are having an influence on the existence, whether it's a self or external?
Ways of measuring? No, I think that's a difficult one because what are we actually measuring? Because sometimes we're measuring just electrical brain activity. Sometimes there are studies that look at electromagnetic fields externally to the brain, and also around the heart too. They give us some sort of ideas to relationship to emotion and changes in electrical fields. But I don't think I don't think science has progressed that far to be able to answer.
Negative and positive, is that kind of left at perception at the moment?
I think
from my understanding of at a molecular level,
Yeah.
that you've got your protons, neutrons, and negative energies flowing in and out of everything all
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah.
So is that not measurable when it comes to the human body?
Because there's so much going on. When you say positive and negative, it's not as straightforward as that, because there are a number of fields and things you could measure are huge. If you just look at electromagnetic fields, yes, you can measure that, and that's useful. And there is changes in electromagnetic fields, you can see that. But how to interpret that is only studies I've seen refer to what happens to electromagnetic fields in relation to emotional change. That's all. So I don't think it's as straightforward. Maybe you can identify more detail and maybe give it to Ramon and pass it on to me. I'll look into it a bit more. I would.
I'll wait to follow up. Okay, so this is a question about the interaction again. Do you think it's possible for theology and theological discussions to drive scientific experimentation and inquiry?
Well, I think a lot of that is actually what has happened to an extent, because a lot of this has been driven by the requirement to know more about the nature of self and also the nature of what the world is made of. Yes, so I think that's absolutely true. I think there are a lot of arguments that maybe even contain some sort of theological flavour, but I think that's true. Yeah, I think that's true.
I'd like to make a comment on your point about there being an external self, and dictating what quantum inferences we want. That's quite interesting that my external self only has control over this one rather than another person.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, we were saying to your other colleague here about the collective consciousness and how it affects it. There is possibly effects that we don't know whether we can telepathically communicate or affect other people in the region. We don't know that. A lot of this science is very much in its infancy in this area, so we can't really answer those questions. But yes, and the whole idea behind the way that the integrated information works and quantum fields work is that they're talking about the self, but the quantum integrated information idea could be that it pervades, like a panpsychism in the form of panpsychism throughout the whole universe, and maybe there are areas where it enacts itself more. But we're reaching the fringe of science, really. We don't have a straightforward answer to these questions.
I was just reading The New Scientist 2 weeks ago about experiment done by Google.
Okay.
Something called, they have a research branch called DeepMind. They have a piece of equipment that they say that has reached consciousness at least to the level of a 4-year-old child through a SALI something experiment.
Okay.
So with the publication of these type of like tests,
Yeah.
so how can we understand it in the light of
Are you referring to artificial intelligence there? Yeah, artificial intelligence is a difficult thing. The point is, a computer may be able to replicate activity, but whether it's conscious or not, as I said to you, there are a lot of arguments that it probably would never be conscious. But I'm not a specialist in artificial intelligence. I can't really answer the question in detail. But I think it's even people who are AI advocates would not confess to the possibility that at the moment all firmly have conviction about whether or not it has actual awareness of what it's doing. It's just a machine, essentially. Yeah. So there's no problem with that, and I think there's no fear about that, in theologically, I don't, for the reasons I mentioned before, highlighted, which was the Gödel's incompleteness theorem and Turing halting problem, and many other reasons which I can't touch upon. It's highly unlikely that you get a computer to do what a human brain or human mind does. It's highly unlikely.
Okay, I think that's time to wrap up. I'd like to thank once again Asim for taking time out, coming down and addressing our seminar on such an interesting topic, and I think we've all benefited greatly. And we hope to continue to have your input into what we do at CIRE, with our research agenda here at Ebrahim College. And thank you everyone for coming and engaging, and all the questions and thoughts, and we want that engagement to continue, please, in the future. We have a break next month. We have no seminar, just to give a kind of a break. There's the Easter holidays coming, and so we sort of a pause. And then in May, we're back on the 15th of May with Wala Qisay from the University of Oxford, and she will be presenting some of her doctoral research, which is sort of looking at generally on the topic of kind of contemporary approaches to tradition and various scholars and thinkers in Europe and North America, Muslim thinkers, and what they're doing with tradition and how they're sort of taking things forward. And she's giving her own sort of critical take on some of that, and it's quite interesting. So please do come back for that presentation, and there'll be more details, of course, online. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time at the seminar.
Okay, thank you.